It is the summer of AD 70. A Jewish historian named Josephus stands outside the walls of Jerusalem and watches a city die. He is 33 years old. He was once a Jewish military commander. Now he works for Rome. And what he is watching, the thing he will spend the next decade trying to describe in words, is the destruction of the most sacred building in the Jewish world, the temple, Herod's temple, a structure so massive its stones weighed more than most Roman bridges, a building that had stood for decades and was meant to stand forever. It is burning. And here is the detail that has haunted historians ever since. The Roman general leading the siege, a man named Titus, son of the emperor, did not want it to burn. He gave explicit orders, "Spare the temple." Rome wanted it intact. A standing temple was more useful than a pile of rubble. Titus wanted a conquest, not a catastrophe. And yet, it burned. Why would a general who ordered the temple saved end up destroying it? How do you get an outcome that nobody, not the Romans, not the Jews, not the surviving eyewitnesses, wanted or planned? We will come back to that question, because the answer is not military, it is not political, it is not accidental. The answer begins 40 years earlier, on a Tuesday afternoon, when a Jewish carpenter's son walked out of that very temple, looked back at its stones, and said something that should have been impossible to believe. This is not a video about end-time speculation. This is not a debate about prophecy charts or timelines. This is not theology written for academics in a library. This is a record drawn from Scripture, from Roman historians, from Jewish eyewitnesses of things Jesus said would happen, and then happened exactly the way he said they would, within the lifetimes of people who were standing in the room when he said them. He was not just a teacher. He was not just a healer. He was a prophet, and he was right every single time. Let's start close. Before we get to history, before we get to armies and burning cities, let's start in a room. It is Thursday night, the last night of Jesus' life, though only he knows that yet. He and his 12 disciples are reclining around a low table in an upper room in Jerusalem. There is bread, there is wine, there is a basin of water, where an hour earlier Jesus washed their feet. It should feel like a celebration. It doesn't. Jesus looks around the table and says something that changes the atmosphere of the room in an instant. "I tell you the truth, one of you will betray me." Stay with me here. There are 12 men in that room. 12 men who have followed Jesus for 3 years. 12 men who left their fishing boats, their tax tables, their families. And Jesus just told them that one of them, one sitting at this table, one who has eaten with him, prayed with him, watched him raise the dead, one of them is about to hand him over to the people who want to kill him. They look at each other. Matthew records the Greek word lipeomai. They were deeply grieved, not confused, not angry, grieved, because they each had enough self-knowledge to ask, "Surely not I, Lord." And then Jesus does something even more specific. He says, "It is the one to whom I will give this piece of bread when I have dipped it in the dish." He takes the bread, he dips it, and he hands it to Judas Iscariot. One man out of 12 named in that room, in that moment.
Within hours, Judas was standing in the high priest's courtyard, accepting 30 silver coins. Before midnight, he was leading a torch-lit mob to the garden where Jesus was praying. Before dawn, he had kissed the cheek of the man he was betraying, and before the week was over, Judas had thrown the coins back into the temple and walked out into a field. Jesus named his betrayer by action, by gesture, 12 hours before it happened. Here's what most people miss about this. Jesus did not have to do it that way. He could have stayed silent. He could have warned the others without identifying Judas specifically. But he named it publicly, precisely, so that when it happened, the disciples would remember. And they did. Now watch what happens next. Same room, same night, after Judas has gone out into the darkness, Jesus turns to the remaining 11, and he looks at the one who is probably already talking, the one who always talks, first, who is already planning how he is going to stay close, how he is going to fight, how nobody is going to take his rabbi before going through him first. He looks at Peter, and he says, "This very night, before the rooster crows, 3 times you will disown me." Peter's answer is immediate. "Even if I have to die with you, I will never disown you." The other disciples said the same thing. You have to feel what this moment is. Peter is not lying. He means it with everything he has. He is a man who will, in a few hours, draw a sword in the garden and attack a soldier. Peter is not a coward. He is not a quitter. He has walked on water, or at least tried to. He is the man who said, "You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God," before anyone else did. And Jesus looked at him and said, "Before the rooster crows, 3 times." The night passes. There is a garden. There is an arrest. There is a high priest's courtyard, cold and firelit. And Peter is standing by a charcoal fire, trying to stay warm, trying to stay close, trying to figure out what to do. And a servant girl looks at him and says, "Weren't you with him?" "I don't know what you're talking about." A little while later, someone else, "You are one of them." "I am not." An hour passes, a third person, "Certainly this fellow was with him, for he is a Galilean." "Man, I don't know what you're talking about." And as the words leave his mouth, Luke records this with the precision of a doctor taking notes. At that exact moment, a rooster crowed, and Jesus turned and looked at Peter. Peter went outside and wept bitterly. 3 times before dawn, the rooster, every condition Jesus named, fulfilled within hours. But here is what makes this remarkable, and this is the part that often gets overlooked. On the same night Jesus predicted Peter's failure, he also predicted his restoration. In Luke's account, just before the dinner, Jesus said, "Simon, Simon, Satan has asked to sift all of you as wheat, but I have prayed for you, Simon, that your faith may not fail. And when you have turned back, strengthen your brothers." When you have turned back. Not if, when. Jesus knew Peter would fall. He also knew Peter would rise, and he prayed for the second thing before the first thing even happened. There's one more thing. Later, that same night, after dinner, walking toward the garden, Jesus told all 11 remaining disciples, "You will all fall away." They would scatter. The shepherd would be struck, and the sheep would run. He was quoting Zechariah chapter 13, and it happened. When the torches came into the garden and the soldiers moved in, every single one of them fled. Mark records that one of them ran so fast he left his garment behind in someone's hands. They scattered. But Jesus did not end the sentence there. He said, "You will all fall away, but after I have risen, I will go ahead of you into Galilee." First prediction, fulfilled within the hour. Second prediction, fulfilled before sunrise on Sunday morning. He is not here. He has risen just as he said. Come and see the place where he lay. Then go quickly and tell his disciples, he is going ahead of you into Galilee. He said it, it happened.
Before we get to what I believe is the most stunning fulfilled prophecy in the entire New Testament, the one with a body count in the millions, the one backed by Roman military records and Jewish eyewitness testimony, I want to ask you something. If you have never thought of Jesus as a prophet before today, you're not alone. Most people think of him as a teacher or a healer or the Son of God. All of that is true, but he was also a prophet, and prophets are judged by one standard: were they right? If this is landing for you, if you are seeing Jesus differently right now, hit subscribe and stay with me, because what's coming in the next 10 minutes is going to change how you read every promise he ever made about the future. The immediate predictions are remarkable. A betrayer named, a denial timed, a scattering predicted, and a reunion promised. All of it fulfilled within hours or days. But Jesus did not stop there. He made predictions that would take years to come true, decades. And he made them with the same calm specificity, the same unhurried confidence that he used to name Judas at a dinner table. Let's look at the first one. After the resurrection, Jesus and Peter are walking along the shore of the Sea of Galilee. It is early morning. There is a charcoal fire, the same smell, John notes, as the fire in the high priest's courtyard the night Peter denied him. And Jesus asks the question 3 times. Simon, son of John, do you love me? 3 times, once for each denial. Peter says yes 3 times, and then Jesus says something that Peter probably did not fully understand in the moment. He says, "When you were younger, you dressed yourself and went where you wanted. But when you are old, you will stretch out your hands, and someone else will dress you and lead you where you do not want to go." Stretch out your hands. Peter was a fisherman. He had stretched out his hands to haul nets his whole life. But this phrase, stretch out your hands, meant a crucifixion. The spreading of the arms, the nails through the wrists. Jesus told Peter on a morning by a lake, AD 33, that he would be crucified. Peter was crucified in Rome under the Emperor Nero, approximately AD 64 to 68, more than 30 years after that morning on the shore. According to early church tradition recorded by Eusebius, Peter asked to be crucified upside down because he considered himself not worthy to die in the same position as his Lord. 30 years between the prophecy and its fulfillment, and it arrived exactly as Jesus described. Pay attention to this. Jesus didn't just predict how Peter would die. He predicted that Peter's death would glorify God. That is not a detail most prophets include. That is not a prediction a man makes if he is guessing. That is a sentence you say if you can see something the rest of the room cannot. Now we pull the camera back even further. The night of his arrest, Jesus stood in front of 11 frightened men who had just watched their world collapse. 11 men from a Roman-occupied backwater. 11 men with no political power, no army, no money, no education beyond what a village synagogue could offer. And he said, Acts chapter 1, verse 8, "You will receive power when the Holy Spirit comes on you, and you will be my witnesses in Jerusalem and in all Judea and Samaria and to the ends of the earth."
the ends of the earth. He said this to 11 men, 9 of whom had never been more than a few hundred miles from where they were born. Here's what happened next. Within 50 days, 3,000 people were added to the church in Jerusalem. Within a few years, there were believers in Antioch, in Cyprus, in Asia Minor, in Macedonia, in Greece, in Rome. Tacitus, the Roman historian, records Christians in Rome by AD 64, when Nero blamed them for the Great Fire. That is 31 years after 11 men were told they would be witnesses to the ends of the earth. Pliny the Younger, governor of the Roman province of Bithynia, modern Turkey, is writing to the Emperor Trajan in AD 112. He is writing because he doesn't know what to do with the Christians. There are so many of them. They meet before dawn, he writes. They sing hymns to Christ as to a god. They take an oath not to commit theft or fraud. He wants to know if being a Christian is in itself a crime. That letter was written 82 years after 11 men were told they would be witnesses to the ends of the earth. Pliny's letter from Turkey is the ends of the earth. But the prediction that came with the sharpest cost was not about geography. It was about suffering. In Matthew chapter 10, Jesus sent his disciples out on their first mission, and before they went, he told them exactly what was coming. He said, "They will hand you over to the local councils and flog you in their synagogues. On my account, you will be brought before governors and kings as witnesses to them and to the Gentiles." Flogged in synagogues, brought before governors, hated by all. This is not a metaphor. Acts is a record of its literal fulfillment. Stephen stoned to death by a synagogue council. James beheaded by order of King Herod Agrippa. Paul flogged 5 times by Jewish authorities, each time receiving 39 lashes, 3 times beaten with rods, shipwrecked 3 times, imprisoned in Philippi, in Caesarea, in Rome, brought before the governor Felix, the governor Festus, the king Agrippa, flogged in synagogues, brought before governors, hated by all. Jesus told them before it happened, and they walked into it anyway.
Now we come to the fire. It is AD 70, the same summer we began in. Josephus is outside the walls of Jerusalem with the Roman army, and he is watching the temple burn. But let's go back 40 years. Let's go back to the afternoon when the prophecy was made. Jesus and his disciples are leaving the temple complex in Jerusalem. It is approximately AD 30, give or take a year. And as they walk out, the disciples do what tourists do. They point, they marvel, they say, "Look at those stones, look at that architecture." The Temple of Herod was one of the greatest building projects in the ancient world. Some of the foundation stones were 60 feet long. 60 feet! The temple platform itself covered 36 acres. Jewish people in Jesus' day looked at that building the way we look at a mountain, permanent, immovable, as certain as the ground beneath your feet. And Jesus stopped, and he looked at those stones, and he said, "Do you see all these great buildings? Not one stone here will be left on another. Every one will be thrown down." The disciples were so stunned, they waited until they were alone on the Mount of Olives to ask about it, because what he said was not just shocking, it was specific. Not Jerusalem will be damaged, not the temple will be weakened, not one stone left on another. Total destruction. And then he gave them a sign to watch for. In Luke chapter 21, he said, "When you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, you will know that its desolation is near."
Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Let those in the city get out, and let those in the country not enter the city. Get out of Jerusalem when you see the armies. Here's the history. In AD 66, Jewish rebels rose against Rome. The Roman general Cestius Gallus marched on Jerusalem with the 12th Legion, roughly 30,000 soldiers. He surrounded the city. He began to breach the temple walls. And then, for reasons historians still debate, he withdrew. He pulled back. The Romans retreated. And something happened in that window that Eusebius records in his church history, written in the 4th century. The Christians in Jerusalem, the ones who had heard Jesus' prophecy, who had been passing it down for 3 decades, fled. They left the city. They crossed the Jordan River and went to a town called Pella in the Decapolis. They obeyed the instruction of a man who had been dead for 36 years. 2 years later, Titus returned with 4 legions, approximately 80,000 soldiers. This time there was no withdrawal. The siege was total. Josephus records that people inside Jerusalem were eating shoe leather and grass before the end. Josephus records that 1,100,000 people died in the siege. Josephus records that Titus, the general, the future emperor of Rome, gave explicit orders, "Do not destroy the temple." And yet, the temple burned. Josephus says soldiers were out of control. Fire broke out in the royal portico. It spread. Titus rode into the temple itself, trying to stop the fire, and could not. The gold that lined the temple walls melted in the heat and ran down into the cracks between the stones. And later, the stones were pried apart to recover the gold. Not one stone left on another. This is not a story about Roman military strategy. This is not a story about bad luck or bad timing. This is the story of a Jewish teacher who stood in the shadow of the most permanent-looking building in his world and said, "It will be completely torn down." And 40 years later, a Roman general who tried to prevent it watched it happen anyway. The destruction of Jerusalem was not what Rome planned. It was what Jesus predicted. And the Christians who fled to Pella, who bet their lives on a 40-year-old prophecy spoken by a man who was dead for 36 years, survived. Their neighbors who stayed didn't. Here's what that means for you right now. Those people in Jerusalem in AD 68, 69, 70, they were not reading a study Bible with commentary notes. They were making a decision. Do I trust what he said enough to act on it before it happens? Do I leave everything I own, everything I know, the only city my family has lived in for generations because a prophet said to? Some of them did, and they were right. Jesus has made other predictions that have not yet been fulfilled. He has spoken about his return. He has spoken about a judgment. He has spoken about a kingdom without end. None of those things have happened yet. But he is a prophet whose track record is 0 mistakes and 0 false starts. He said it, it happened, every single time.
So here is what we've seen today. Takeaway 1. Jesus made specific, falsifiable predictions about a named individual, about the timing of a denial, about the manner of a death, about the spread of a movement, about the fate of a city and a building, and every single one of them came true. This is not a matter of vague spiritual language that could mean anything. Josephus documented the temple stones. Pliny documented the Christians in Turkey. Eusebius documented the flight to Pella. The fulfilled prophecies of Jesus are not just a matter of faith, they are a matter of history. Takeaway 2.
If the near prophecies are accurate, the ones that could be checked within a lifetime, the ones with witnesses and records and archaeology, then you have to take seriously the ones that haven't happened yet. Jesus spoke about his return. He spoke about justice for every person who ever lived. He spoke about a world made new. Those words carry the same weight as "not one stone will be left on another." And that stone is in a museum in Jerusalem right now. Takeaway 3. The Christians who fled to Pella were not heroes. They were just people who believed what Jesus said before it happened and then acted on it. That is what faith has always been. Not feeling certain, not having all the answers, just betting your life on the track record of the one who has never been wrong. He said it. It happened every single time, and he has spoken about your future too. Which of these fulfilled prophecies hit you the hardest today? Was it the temple? Was it Peter on the shore? Was it Pliny the Younger writing a letter about Christians in Turkey 82 years after a resurrection? Tell me in the comments. I read every one. And if you want to go deeper, if you want to look at the prophecies Jesus made that haven't come true yet, that video is right there, because the record he built in the 1st century is the reason we should pay attention to everything he said about what's coming next. He said it. It happened. He said it.